Hello and welcome to OU Texas Week. It is the greatest rivalry, in my opinion, in American sports, and we are so pumped to preview it with not one, not two, technically four videos if you count the weekend spread. But we're kicking off our preview series starting with Ty. Look, we always every year we obviously follow Texas here and there because they come up on the weekend spread and everything, but sometimes you need a view from the other perspective. You know what I mean?
Yes,
And
I know
because
what
of
you
that,
mean, Bobby.
I don't know.
I
I
didn't
didn't
know if
really
that
give
was
you
a
much.
prop for me or not. I didn't know if you were going to keep going or if that
I
was a
didn't give you
prop.
much to work
That's on
with.
me.
No, I also didn't give you much to work with there, to be honest. But no, so as we do every year, we gotta bring in an expert that knows
Mhm.
the Longhorns because you got to know your enemy. It's important. It's important to
Mhm.
know your enemy. So let's. I'm gonna stop wasting time. It's time to bring him out.
Give me a fat beat!
It gets me every time. Welcome on to the show. Good friend of the podcast, Chris Ilenstine. Chris, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Happy to be on as always for our new tradition, talking Texas OU and Red River.
For sure. And we've done this several times here and there, but Texas through the years has changed quite a bit. And um there's been like Texas has kind of reached an apex in college football right now. Number one in the country. This is the first OU Texas game where the Longhorns are entering ranked number one since 1984. The infamous 15-15 tie. Um, and the first time OU has played a top ranked team in general since in the regular season, rather, since 2000 Nebraska. So the Longhorns are entering this game about as high as they've ever been. What has this season been like? This ascension under Steve Sarkisian?
Yeah, so obviously you guys have been following it longer than me. I know we like to play games that I'm not a TCU person anymore, but I think Texas. I think the biggest change. I think it can kind of go last year and this year is sort of we always talked about the culture, maybe from the end of Mac Brown until Steve Sarkisian was always a culture transferring players not getting playing time or not performing up to expectations. But I think now, especially the past few years, you're really starting to see like the speed, the physicality, the buy-in into the program, and they're also I think that transfers into the recruiting section as well, where it seems like people are finally excited to like the Texas brand is one that you see a lot of high school recruits are gravitating towards.
For sure. And I think Texas as a brand has always been strong. Wouldn't you agree, Ty? Like the Longhorn, the whole vibe about UT has always kind of been there. And, I don't know. It kind of feels like they're kind of there.
Yeah, and I don't mean this to turn into a jab or a tangent, but I would argue, that the brand of Texas was traditionally much stronger, right? To have a brand as strong as they did with very little on-field performance to back it up just speaks to the brand. Whereas now, of course, when you're number one, it's very easy to have a very, very good brand. But yeah, they've certainly leveraged that and are continuing to grow that, obviously, with, particularly Bama fans now looking for a place to call home for the next couple of years because they can't count on Georgia anymore either. So Texas may be looking to scoop up a lot of that fan base.
Hey, Texas scoops up a lot of recruits from Alabama, so it makes sense for them to scoop up some of their fans as well. But let's talk about this rivalry in general. It's just always so heated. I feel like last year was like such a crescendo of hate. OU came out, with their hair on fire. Certainly did a lot afterwards with the video, the whole, Texas fears Oklahoma, Oklahoma only fears God thing. Has that game really kind of cranked up any animosity on the Texas side? Are people in Burnt Orange still thinking about that at all? Is there a revenge element to this, or is it just the rivalry as usual?
I mean, I feel like it's the rivalry as usual. I think, especially this is one of the better opportunities in recent years for postseason down the line. So I think, especially with Georgia coming the week after, Texas has to keep focusing on one game at a time and treat it, as a rivalry, but not be too focused on what has happened in the past. I know I was doing a little bit of research on the history of the spread as well, since it's, I think, 14.5 right now. I don't know if you guys know this as well, but this might be the only third time I believe that Texas has been a double-digit favorite in like 40 years or something. And in fact, a lot of like the big upsets in Red River have been Texas beating a big OU spread. So I think there might be a little bit of caution with the 14.5, but I think Texas is ready to play as usual.
Yeah, it's an unusually massive line, on both sides of things. But Texas really has played spoiler a ton in the past. OU fans certainly know it. I wouldn't say a ton, but more for OU has lost to Texas teams they should not have lost to. The gap would have been much narrower if they just took care of business against some of these bad teams. And OU hasn't had the opportunity to be a spoiler really in since what the late, essentially the late 90s.
I mean, last year.
Yeah, last year was one of the first times in a while. So this underdog role is a little bit weird as an OU fan. So I don't know. It's one of those where it's like, well, these guys could do it anytime, so why can't we?
Yeah, certainly. And it is a game that, like you touched on, Bobby, last year. I think maybe rose-colored glasses a little bit from OU fans, because I think we expected that one in that team last year to be a little bit worse than they actually ended up being, and certainly we expected probably Red River to be a little bit worse than it ended up to be. But this is definitely a game where anything can happen. People always say that in their rivalry games, but the record really backs it up in this game, like you said, Chris. I think I'm looking at the same stats, sort of 40-ish years, and there haven't really been a whole lot of double-digit spreads in this one. And obviously, 2 years ago, rough game for OU fans, but there haven't really been a whole lot of instances when you really look at the whole timeline of people really, really running away with it either, which is, I think just speaks to the quality of the game.
That's exactly what I was about to say, Ty. You stole it from me.
I believe in the past 10 years, there's only been one game that was decided by more than a touchdown, and it was obviously the 49-0 game. So it's a traditionally just incredibly tight series, regardless of record, regardless of how good these teams are. And I don't know, maybe I'm on the optimistic side. We'll get to your thoughts of the Sooners as we kind of dive into this, because I imagine last year you weren't very big on the Sooners, I will say, and I think that was fair. OU ended up winning. What are your initial thoughts on OU? Kind of looking at this thing, because it's quite an interesting state of affairs down here in Oklahoma.
You're asking for my opinion on OU? I think
yes.
Last year, just like Ty, I wasn't big on Dylan Gabriel, but I think he brought sort of a stopgap for a couple years for OU, where he was just a veteran player who could come in and run an offense and maybe not provide a lot of huge downfield play, but you kind of expected him to execute exactly. I think you come into this year, and I've actually been able to watch a fair amount of the OU games, and I do think Hawkins provides a little bit of spark that Jackson Arnold, just frankly, whether it's confidence or something, hasn't shown. But I will say some of the play calling and just total offense from OU is it's just not inspiring, to say the least. So,
Chris, I've got a question for you. What are you going to be feeling if this game into the first quarter, 10-0 Texas, Michael Hawkins looks atrocious, but then second quarter starts and out comes Casey Thompson. Are you going to be a little shivering in your boots that OU has a seasoned, experienced stopgap player in there?
Wait, he's on OU?
Yes, he is.
Casey
He's
Thompson's on
behind Michael
OU now.
Hawkins.
I actually did not follow that, but I also would not be too scared about him either because he has a noodle arm. But
I don't know. He's beaten OU before, hasn't he?
No, they lost. That was the Caleb Williams game, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was their quarterback for the Caleb Williams game, and he was.
It was the 28-0, and then just exploded with Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and he was Nebraska's quarterback when we destroyed him in Lincoln. So
I want to
he got him twice.
He wasn't the regular season, or was that Ellinger? Was the regular season win and then revenge in the Big 12 championship?
That was Ellinger.
That was Ellinger's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, to be fair, Casey Thompson's been in college football so long that I don't blame you thinking he's been around since 18.
I think if you watch the Casey Thompson Texas team and then you watch this Texas team, it would be like a high school team versus an SEC. I don't even think they look the same on film.
They had Worthy, a really young Worthy, but it's a different. Sark has built that program up quite a bit from then to now. But your point on OU though, I do feel I agree. The offense is not where we want it to be. It's concerning, given how Seth Luttrell's been calling it. Obviously, a lot of our issues are with injuries, wide receivers. The wide receiver core is just completely devastated. But I don't know. I think Michael Hawkins does bring a little bit of that unknown factor yet, because we saw him play one game against Auburn. I don't know. If there is a creative ounce of energy in Luttrell's brain, do you think Michael Hawkins can maybe create some opportunities for the Sooners, or are you just kind of not concerned about him?
No, I mean, really, if I'm being totally honest, the concern I have is just that it's a rivalry game and that OU gets up for it. And I do think I've been really impressed with OU's defense. I think they've looked about as good as you can be when they're on the field the entire game. But, I think this game is going to come down to how much OU's defense can stay off the field. If Texas can keep 3 and outs or turnovers, or he gets, shaken because he's a true freshman in a rivalry game, then, OU's defense can only, as with any defense, can only do so much if they're on the field for a long time.
Exactly. Because you just get exhausted at some point. All right, let's start talking about Texas a little bit here. So, obviously, bit of an interesting situation with the quarterback room. Everyone talks about it quite a bit. With Quinn Ewers' injury, he looks like, I believe they've already announced that he's going to start for this one, so no controversy for Red River. But what are your thoughts on the whole Quinn Ewers versus Arch Manning situation, Chris?
I think my big concern would just be, I was hoping Quinn would play a little against Mississippi State, if anything, just because we had the bye week last week or this weekend anyway. So I think it's a little bit interesting that you have a quarterback who hasn't played in a couple weeks, goes into a bye week, and now has to go OU and Georgia back to back. So I wouldn't be 100% surprised if the offense looked a little rusty. It's one of those situations where you don't want to pull the hot hand, Arch Manning. I know Ty is not a big Quinn Ewers fan, but I think they're giving him the nod because he is the leader of the team as well. And I think from what I hear, it sounds like Arch is fine playing when needed, but getting his shot next year. That's what I've heard. So
I will say I have been advocating, shout out to another notable former Texas student, I guess not alum, Kevin Durant, but I have been advocating for college football to move to the Durant, or maybe Kyler Murray's a better analogy, model of just playing a single year and then going to the draft. So I don't necessarily maybe disagree with Arch Manning, although he is the better quarterback on the team, but it is masterful to collect the NIL bag and then minimize your damage, minimize your exposure in college. He should go to the draft this year. He's got 3 games experience already. That's really all you need. I'm only half joking with that take too. It's like that. I think that will become more of the norm. Like it's going to be atrocious for the sport.
It is
People do a
interesting.
single year and then bounce.
I do think Quinn Ewers kind of created a bit of like a traffic jam as far as like quarterback rotation, but I think I don't remember who, but somebody brought up a good point. Like if Arch was going to transfer as it stands right now, where would he go? That's a better, if he was going to play this year somewhere else, that was a better situation and where he would start right away. There's not a lot of options with a program that would be better.
I'll tell you
I
right
would say
now, and I'm
Ohio
not going to
State.
go on a tangent. Yeah, I'm not going to go on a tangent. Florida State would be undefeated with Arch Manning. There is one man and one man only responsible for that situation. But we're gonna stay on Red River here.
You didn't even play last week, but
He's
he
already
was still there.
He's already tanked them though. That's like, I didn't hold them
Yeah.
to the ocean floor. I just tied an anchor to them.
But if we're really talking about the state of the offense, I'm not I think it could start slow. I mean, as the teams get used to each other, but at some point OU's got to cover. I wrote this down. Texas has 5 wide receiver options that have at least 100 plus yards in this game or in the season so far, and a tight end, Gunnar Helm, who's been averaging around 40 yards a game, and 3 different running backs who average 5 yards per carry. So there's a very tall task for OU as far as just covering everybody. I mean, they could do a good job taking away Isaiah Bond, who's really shown as the leader transferring from Alabama. But if it's not him, then it could be somebody else. And if it's not them, then it's somebody else. And at some point, I'm not sure that they can cover everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's really the true strength of that Texas offense is that wide receiver core is really, really deep. Obviously, you talk about Bond. Gunnar Helm has been great for them. So yeah, if like Texas, that's the strength by far. You put in Quinn, put in Arch, whoever, I think that receiving core would, like, if you put Jackson Arnold back there with that
DJ?
O line, he'd probably look good. DJU, maybe. I don't know how far can DJU take Texas. That's a big question.
Texas, yeah.
I don't know. These wide receiver average numbers, it might be too far down the field for him. But just to throw one more thing at you, of those people I mentioned, the least average per catch is 12.4 of all those. So all those people are averaging 12.4 yards per catch or more. Isaiah Bond is averaging 18 yards per catch, and Ryan Wingo, who's a true freshman, is 22.5 yards per catch. So they're definitely willing to spread it out. It's not a dink and dunk either, but I mean, it would be tough for anybody. I mean, it's not necessarily a indictment on OU. So
I do have to say, and this kind of speaks to both teams and readiness for the SEC and everything else. And this might be a case of me just paying much more attention to Texas than I do Georgia and Bama, specifically for this comparison. But Texas looks like a true number 1 team. Like they don't. I mean, you can make some arguments about how quality was that Michigan win, and not that they ain't played nobody argument, but you're talking about it here, Chris, with the offense, because that's OU's biggest thing right now is I think you get everyone healthy, and not to get into this tangent, but and I'm certainly not making an excuse or hedging, but you get everyone healthy on the OU team, and it's much more of a, okay, these are 2 not that far off teams, right? If OU has all our people healthy, this line is not 14.5. And not to make that as an excuse, but you talk about Texas and you talk about just the depth there, right? You have 2 quarterbacks who are tremendous, like 2 quarterbacks that could go anywhere and start right away. Like you touched on, multiple running backs, really, again, 2 that are just right up there. And then the depth at receivers. And I'm sure, we always forget about it, the line and everything else, but that depth that Sark has been able to create there is just insane. And it's, like we talk about, there's just so many things. It really doesn't seem like, again, from the outside in, and then now from the inside, when you're describing it, it certainly doesn't seem like there's anything where you look at, oh, I hope they don't, knock this leg out, because then we're going to be relying on this one. So that is certainly, I think, the scariest thing to me about Texas, because I look at that and I look at, I don't have to just worry about this year. I have to worry about next year and the year after, and then success breeds success. And there's a tremendous power vacuum in the sport right now. So that's to me, it just keeps like bouncing around in my head. I'm supposed to ask you a question. That's not a question. But
I guess.
Would you agree? Yes or no?
Do you agree? Yes or no? I do think so. I think we're talking about the power vacuum and the rest of the SEC. Things certainly do get interesting. I don't think Texas will get complacent, but I think we're going to see a weird shift now that they're the only undefeated team left in the SEC. I think some of these games down the stretch are going to become maybe more challenging as maybe we didn't think about at the beginning of the season. The at Vanderbilt, now they're a powerhouse, I guess. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, OU's slated with maybe an angry Alabama now, and they certainly, as you guys have mentioned in previous podcasts, OU definitely got the short end of the stick as far as SEC scheduling. But yeah, I don't know. I also wrote some notes on defense. You guys got to ask me questions about the defense.
No, absolutely. I do want to ask a couple things on a couple more things. I know you mentioned the running backs who have been averaging a lot of yards per carry against garbage. To be fair, that was kind of a big question entering the season. Given a couple injuries here and there, Jaden Blue, I feel like, has really been in a lot of cases the feature back. He had a bit of a rough game against Mississippi State last week with 2 fumbles. I don't know. Would you consider the running game a bit of a liability, or is that not a concern for you at all?
I wouldn't say it's a liability. I don't know if it's really picked up as much as it needs to, but in all fairness, last season when they had Jonathan Brooks before he tore his ACL against TCU, it did take them 4, 5, 6 games to really start to get the running game figured out. Last week, I will say I was there in person for the Mississippi State game. Wasn't that Jeff Lebby now? But they literally spent the entire game trying to play keep away, keep Texas off the field, and so they were running it nonstop. And so I think Texas had to pick up a little bit of rushing in the second half to pick up some more time of possession. But I think either besides Jaden Blue, Gibson has been a good option. He's a true freshman. Quintravian Wisner is also kind of a shifty back. So I think it's by committee at this point. I'm not super concerned. They all split, like I said, almost 5 yards per carry between 3 different running backs. So, and then last week they did 31 rushing attempts and 31 passing attempts, which is a little bit run heavy. I'm curious to see. I don't know much about OU's as far as pass defense versus rush defense, but I'm very curious to see the sort of breakdown between rushing and passing this upcoming weekend for Red River.
It's OU's defense is interesting because I think you're seeing a little bit of cracks with the secondary. If you wanted to point out a weakness, the rush defense, I feel like, is pretty solid. Auburn was able to break off a couple big ones here and there, but not anything too crazy. It's a linebacking core, which is one of the deepest in the country, and a really, really solid D line for OU. So it's one of those where I feel like if OU can kind of make Texas one-dimensional, that is an opportunity for the OU defense. But, it's one of those things where even a one-dimensional Texas team has so many options through the air that it's scary as hell. But
yeah, I have kind of a question on that, Chris. This sort of bleeds into, some of the Sooner magic that OU maybe needs to do well in this game. But when you sort of compare the defenses, and especially when you talk about, we've seen some, maybe some turnover issues from our backs before, the Sooner defense is much better equipped, I think, if you had to pick one to stop the run. Certainly, looking at the turnovers right now, we've 15 pass deflections, 5 interceptions. But 8 fumble recoveries from the Sooner defense. For context, Texas is looking at 18 pass deflections, 7 interceptions, but only 2 fumble recoveries. So the Sooners defense that certainly is able to generate turnovers in the air and on the ground. We're averaging more than 1 interception a game, but I think that's something that when I look at these teams, if I really get nitpicky, That's maybe the one thing that OU can do to turn the tide a little bit is, of course, generate turnovers, like you always hear everyone say, but generate the turnovers on the ground and maybe try to force Texas, even with good quarterbacks, good receivers, still inherently a little bit more risky. Does that concern you at all? OU's ability to generate turnovers and what you think Texas might be able to do to mitigate that.
I will say, if I'm being completely honest, it'll have to be through fumbles because I just double checked this, but um, Texas has thrown 4 total interceptions through 5 games, 2 with Quinn, 2 with Arch, and obviously Arch's 2 were in 1 game. So I think we've been pretty good at not turning it over through the air. Obviously, as you guys alluded to, the fumbles were definitely a big issue last game. So, but I will say, if that was an issue last week, I'm almost most certain that that would have been a focus in practice coming into Red River on not turning the ball over. The one thing I will say as well, OU's defense has looked good, but I did double check and they were 42nd ranked defense. And if we're being honest, Tennessee is a really good team, but the other teams that OU played were not exceptional on offense. So it's a little bit of a wrinkle. I honestly thought they were ranked probably a top 10 defense, but it'll have to be through the ground, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things where the total defense isn't good, but they are relatively solid at preventing scores. It can be very bend but don't break it times. I feel like the Auburn numbers looked pretty deceiving compared to what that game kind of was. Because Auburn, like if you just look at the total yards, they were racking it up, but I think the defense.
I mean, let's not forget what the score was before you guys came back.
Fair. No, I get it. I get it. But it wasn't. Usually, if you outgain a team like that, you slaughtered them. So
right.
It's just one.
I
of
have
those,
to take you to task
things.
Because our friend Blake did give me basically a mandate to come on here and expose OU as a paper tiger, to use his words exactly. So.
Of course, he used the paper tiger term. That's that's funny. Okay, so let's ask you some questions about the Longhorn defense here. I feel like they had a ton to replace, especially on the defensive line. That does not seem like it's been much of an issue. I think entering the season, it was a big question mark. But how has Texas responded to losing guys like T'Vondre Sweat and just a stacked D line from last year?
So they sort of did it through the transfer portal, and not to use the phrase by committee again, but they picked up, I forget his name, from Arizona, and a few other guys that they rotate. Kind of looks like they rotate 2 sets of defensive tackles for rushing, and then obviously a special package for actual pass rush, long passing attempts. But, I feel like they're not as good on the rush defense, but what was a big concern last year was the pass defense. And I do think they got the transfer from Clemson at safety. Jade Barron returned at corner. I think his name's Jaden Gilbo, who was injured part of last season, has come back and played well. So I think it's kind of been an evening out where the rush defense is maybe not as strong as it was last season, but the pass defense has been a little better. And so they've kind of met in the middle. And so they're currently ranked 3rd overall, which, as you guys mentioned, I'm not going to sit here and pretend their schedule has been super challenging thus far, but we do have a strong 2 weeks ahead of us to see how good the defense, how much it is kept from last season.
Yeah. I will say real quick context. Yeah. Texas is 3rd overall in defense, number 2 in pass defense behind Minnesota. And, not to diminish that, but do keep in mind that Alex Orji has been the best quarterback that Texas has faced all year. I don't think, in saying that, I'm not saying anyone on OU's team is a better quarterback than those, but looks like 21 in rush defense, which if OU had a rushing offense at all, maybe that would be something that we could exploit. But
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's potential for Michael Hawkins Jr. to be better than Alex Orji and whatever bozo Michigan decided to start. But is he? I don't know. I think he's better than General Booty. Whoever y'all have, like, whatever Blake Shapen replacement Mississippi State rolled out, but it's not.
It's basically
I
just
wouldn't
a
say a
triple
challenge.
option, read option kind of offense. I sat there and I watched them run the ball maybe 20 times in a row. But no, I think Hawkins presents a unique challenge as far as running more than Jackson Arnold. He definitely has looked like he can take off and exploit a defense. So I think that will be a trouble for Texas, but maybe not necessarily to the perimeter. I feel like Texas is extremely fast outside, but if they're able to expose the line, again, I'm not really sure how OU's line is, but if he's able to get some gaps inside, I think not good. I see you guys shaking your head.
Not great,
There
Chris.
is
They're doing their
when we're talking
best.
about OU's offense, there is nothing to not be ashamed of at this point in the season.
Well, I wouldn't say
Well,
ashamed
Hawkins,
of.
I would say I'm ashamed of Hawkins, but
Yeah, and it's hard to be ashamed of the receiver room because they're all beat up. Because
well,
it's like
the ones that are out there.
I'm not going to be mad at JJ Hester and Zion Reagan's for being forced into a situation where they or Jacoby Johnson, who had to flip over from cornerback to add some depth to the wide receiver room. So it's one of those things that that's tricky, and our running game hasn't been very good this year. It's been a bit of a confusing setup. Gavin Sawchuk hasn't been able to get going much because the line hasn't been great. We've at our best back has probably been Javonte Barnes, who he's all right. And overall, it's just play calling. You just keep running the ball directly right into the middle of the defense, which I'm guessing Texas is pretty beefy in the middle, right? Or no?
Well, I mean, the transfer from Arizona is huge. I've seen firsthand, but it's interesting. I don't think Texas is as good as covering rush, but they do have good linebackers. Anthony Hill, he's got the green dot. He's getting the play calls. David Benda, who's sort of a veteran, and a true freshman pass rusher. So it's kind of by committee, but I think if OU is not creative with their play calling and just runs it up the middle, then I certainly think those guys are more than capable. So
I will say for rushing context, Jackson Arnold still OU's number 2 rusher. Obviously did not play last game at 138 yards. Javonte Barnes just a yard shy of 200, and the team only has 600 something yards on the season. Almost half of it coming from quarterbacks who are not necessarily Heisman level running quarterbacks. So I will say though,
Hawkins is fast.
Yeah,
I mean, if anything, a rushing quarterback, I don't care who you are, will always throw a wrench in your game plan. It's just one extra thing you have to plan for. So I'm sure, given the bye week, Sarkisian and the defense is always prepared for Hawkins, but since we know he's starting, but I don't know. It's one of those things where, like you guys say with the Sooner Magic or whatever, it's a rivalry. I think, as you guys mentioned, true freshman Caleb Williams came in and threw a wrench in the game plan. But that's the only thing that worries me, is that it's always a rivalry game and that you can throw stuff out the window.
I will say on the topic of that, and on the topic of Hawkins, and you'll see it in this game, no matter which way it goes, but he really does have the makings of a folk legend hero. He doesn't give the nowadays, the college football player mercenary vibe. Like you saw it, if you saw the end of the Tennessee game when he came in and doing that. Well, he didn't do it on purpose, but getting hit in the air and flipping, trying to get a touchdown, and just the grind and the heart that he has. It certainly is the kind of guy that it would worry me if he were on the other side of the ball, just seeing that, this is their little Timothy Chalamet from Dune. He is the Lisan Al Gaib or whatever it is.
He's the chosen one.
Come from nowhere and lead. He does have that energy in a way that obviously Caleb Williams came in, and took over that game. But I don't think I've seen an OU quarterback with that energy since Baker. really, and that's not to diminish anyone else that's come, in between Baker and. But I think it does have that energy that certainly would worry me if he were on the other side of the ball. Of, oh, this guy has that folk hero. This guy has that chippy, scrappy. You'd see him in a children's fairy tale about the chippy underdog that makes some sooner magic happen.
That's kind of what
Yeah,
OU has been missing. Since Baker, you've had Kyler, Jalen Hurts. Spencer Rattler was homegrown talent, but then Caleb came and left, and Dylan Gabriel. So it's kind of been a lot of, like I mentioned earlier, stopgap or people, as you said, mercenaries coming in, taking the reins for a year or two. But you guys have really been missing someone, true freshman, start to finish kind of player since that time frame, since Baker, I feel like.
Yeah, and I mean,
Well,
there's
he was also a
this,
transfer.
Right.
yeah.
I get that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but there was an element with Baker too, where he like grew up an OU fan, and Hawkins obviously did the same, given the fact that his dad played at OU, so he has a legacy, which is kind of cool. I think OU's social media shared this really cool like side by side of Hawkins Jr. and his dad, both of them scoring touchdowns back and forth, and it was just kind of neat. So. I think there is that folklore, element as, a kid who grew up an OU fan in the Dallas Fort Worth area. This one surely just means a lot to him. He's not the most expressive guy here, off the field. He's not a big talker, but you could tell this means a lot to the guy. So I think that's definitely something, that, the script writers, if college football had script writers, they'd be all over this.
It's a damn shame that Oregon and
speaking-
Ohio State had to play, or we should have had game day again.
We got the SEC Nation show, I guess. I don't know. Get old Paul Feinbaum. Which, by the way, that guy's gonna have one hell of a week. That guy's gonna have one hell of a week with Alabama losing to Vandy. Okay, so what other elements of this game are we missing? Chris, I know you have a couple notes. Anything you want to ask us, or anything we've missed? I'm sure there's certainly some stuff that a couple blind spots.
I don't know much. How has special teams been a factor? I feel like, as far as Texas goes, the kicking has been solid, but there hasn't. Not to sound overconfident, but there just hasn't been a lot of like punting or kickoff or like drama in that area, and kicking has been relatively solid, but I don't know that much about OU on that side.
Our starting kicker got appendicitis a couple weeks ago, so we had to put it on the other guy, and he was actually not that bad. So all things considered, it's a pretty drama-free category for OU. The returning's been pretty good. Kicking, Tyler Keltner, who should be back for this, has been pretty good, honestly, all things considered. So it's definitely not a concern. I don't think he's a gamer or anything. He's not he's not Dicker the kicker or anything. But he is definitely more reliable than guys we've had in the past.
And then another question I had, given the spread, but I think this Texas team is different from years past, where they're 4-1 against the spread this season. Their only loss being, obviously, the Mississippi State game was a 37.5 point spread, which is hard for anybody to cover, especially when it's one of the bigger SEC spreads ever. 90% of the public money is on Oklahoma. Does that concern you guys at all? Do you think that's a trap or anything, or does that give you guys hope?
Ty, I'll let you start with that one. What do you think about that?
I mean, I don't know. The spread is a hard one, right? Like OU is also 4-1 against the spread. I guess maybe it depends on the book you're looking at. Like I'm seeing on, according to ESPN Bet, oh no, I'm reading that wrong. They don't have the stats up there. Never mind.
I'm just taking my number from my employer's page for the game preview. They usually have a composite of all the books, but
yeah,
go ahead, Ty.
I don't know. To me, I have this conspiracy that ideally, right, every team ends up like 500 against the spread. That's kind of odds makers doing their job correctly, I suppose. But I'm not necessarily worried about that. I mean, I don't know. I guess this gets into sort of conclusions and score expectations, but I don't necessarily know that I'm too worried about. I mean, it's a rivalry game, and I think that's what most people are seeing, and they're seeing that outside of, I think it was 2019, 2018 or 19. Like Bobby said, it's been less than 10 points final score outside of that 49-0 for a long time. I think you have to go back to, would it be '05, which I think was a year that Texas may have been number one, or they certainly were big favorites going into that game. That you had a big spread like this going into the game. So I think really it's probably analytics kind of that people are looking at more than anything else.
Yeah, I for one it doesn't bother me. I definitely see the 14.5 as more of a chip on your shoulder sort of thing. Because if you look at both teams, you have to favor Texas. I think 14.5 is too high for this game in particular, just because it is always close. And I think OU's defense is going to be good enough to, slow down UT. And I don't know. I think I'm more, I don't know, encouraged in a weird way by the high spread, or like more like, oh yeah, we'll show them, like we're the big dogs here. Like it's gonna be, we'll
I
shock
think
the
you
world.
are right. Yeah, I think you're right, Bobby. That does encourage me as an OU fan, because I always think, oh, we're going to have that Sooner magic, or we're going to at least be fighting to the very end. It does encourage me to see, I guess, that most of the betting population at least doesn't think we're going to get blown out by more than 2 touchdowns. So
Okay, well, let me add one more wrinkle in it for you guys, and then you tell me your thoughts. So 90% of the money is on OU. And as recently as yesterday and from a few days ago, according to my employer's website, the line movement has gone from Texas minus 8.5 to minus 14.5 or minus 15, depending on your book. Do you think there's any reason, like, has there been any OU news, or what do you think is the reason why the line has shifted that much in that direction?
Well, I think the 8.5 was a number that came out. I don't know if it's time stamped or anything, but that was definitely, I remember it being around 8.5 in preseason. I've seen it open, like when they threw it back on to the markets 2 weeks, or like last week, it opened at 16.5, got rapidly bet down to 14.5, and then they took it off. It's come back on at 14.5. So I don't think there's anything in particular. There is question as to which receivers will be back. How long will they be out? That sort of thing. But that's just been looming over this team, really since
Are
the
they
start.
season injuries? Is there a timetable on those people?
no, we have one guy with like a pulled hamstring that's been out for forever because he keeps like a week before he should play. We keep throwing him in and then immediately re-injuring him.
We did it one time, but yeah.
Our best
So
receiver.
So it's the guy who beat Texas last year. With that corner touchdown, Nick Anderson. Preseason hamstring injury. Re-aggravated it against Tennessee in like the first quarter. Then you have Andrew Anthony, who got hurt in last year's Red River, tore his I think it was ACL or Achilles. I should know that.
It was ACL.
It was his ACL. He tore his ACL, long-term recovery sort of thing, complications, had a procedure in the offseason, that sort of deal. He's been day-to-day. We really don't know about him. And then Deion Burks, who's been our best receiver. He had a soft tissue injury. He's probably the guy most likely to come back, but we'll see. And I'm sure there are a couple other seasoned guys, like Jaden Gibson is one. Jalil Farouk is going to take a couple weeks to get back.
How long has that guy been in college football? Jalil Farouk. I feel like I've heard that name forever.
3 years.
3 years. His first, he played as a freshman in 2021.
I do have to say, shout out to our resident injury guy. A little pun there. Jameson is listening to this right now, losing his mind that he's not able to comment on an injury status discussion. And Listen to my fancy doctor words, as the
I
Tennessee
did
fans would
listen.
say.
I think
My
that was
three
weekend
TVs.
spread last week where he was educating on soft tissue versus other like related injuries.
That was
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, the Tennessee fans got onto him because of the. Oh, hey,
So
well, we have Tennessee fans watching. Chris, do you want to become famous on Tennessee radio? Do you want to make some
Sure. Are you ready?
controversial statements
Are
about
you
the real
ready?
UT?
Well, that was going to be my only comment was that there's only one UT and it's Texas. So
There you go.
I will
you know what?
say,
I've had some really bad. I've had some run-ins with Tennessee volunteer Twitter before. It did not. There were maybe some photoshops of my picture in vulgar ways, and I may have had to just violently block people and remove and like play defense against these hordes of people. But I get where you guys are coming from. They're not a fun fan base to have to deal with at all.
That's
I I do have to say this is one that the Tennessee fans are going to love because we as in myself and them we're both aware of this happening. Bobby is in denial, and I'm sure you will deny it, Chris. But when I look at the way that this line is moving, like you're talking about, the money continues to pour in on Oklahoma, yet the line continues to shift towards Texas. It's very obvious to me what's happening here. We all know that it's all a sham. It's no longer real now that we're paying everyone and ESPN and the SEC or in cahoots and everything else. And they've clearly called in, something to make, Bama with Georgia and now Alabama with Vanderbilt and everything else. They're clearly propping Texas up to number one. And when I look at Texas's schedule, they're one excusable game to lose if they must, which, side note, this is related to what I'm talking about. It is moderately infuriating that we're now in week 7 of the season, and essentially every team is still in the playoff race besides Florida State. We have too many playoff teams. People should be done right now. Like, all of these teams have inexcusable losses, and they're still very much in the race. And I think when I look at Texas's schedule, right, you lose to OU, that's a very excusable one to lose. It's neutral sites. It's a rivalry game that's always supposed to be close. And then you get to go beat Georgia if you so desire to beat Georgia, depending on what the script writers have in store for you. And then you get to go beat the team that beat Bama, and then Florida, who knows with Florida. And then you get to go beat not Tennessee, but the team that beat Tennessee. So it very much is obvious what the SEC is doing here in sort of creating this resume that inflates itself for everyone else. And there could be a case that the script writers might actually let OU get this one. Is that concerning to you at all, that maybe the script writers are going to toss OU a win here?
My pushback was maybe you could make the case that was the case last season because Texas got to come in and say the same thing, like, hey, our only loss is a rivalry game. OU was a very overinflated 10-win team, I feel like, last season because I don't think Dylan Gabriel's very good. That's just my opinion. But right, according to, to your point, Ty, preseason, I said Texas has 3. This was kind of before we figured out that Michigan is really bad, but I said they had 3 games. Of those, they could even lose 2, but it was Michigan, OU, and Georgia are the 3 that are marked on the calendar that are maybe the only excusable losses, as you said. I do think there's a little bit of a wrinkle in some of these games, like at Arkansas, like some of these trap games, at A&M, obviously, like the first time the rivalry's back. I would hate to lose that one, but
that would actually be the funniest thing, especially if
the
they
last game of the season undefeated.
Especially if they lost like a bunch of other games going into it. It would be
like
really
A&M went on a losing streak and then just like knocked out a win.
Yeah. Like A&M loses to New Mexico State and Auburn, and then they beat you guys.
So
and then they beat Texas to get in the SEC title.
I think it plays out a couple ways. If OU wins this game, I think they're overinflated for what they are. And I think if Texas wins this game, it is seen as like a respectable win. It's a rivalry, whatever. I think OU has kind of been riding along, not to use the paper tiger reference again, but it was kind of like that first Dylan Gabriel season before he got injured where they strung a few wins in a row. They got into like the top 5 and then it just went on like a train off the tracks, right?
Okay, let's not. I know you're a TCU guy. This is a big debate between Bobby and I. OU was getting absolutely demolished in that game before Gabriel got injured. It was Gabriel was
we are
that's what
not
I'm saying.
talking
Gabriel
That was
about
my
getting
point.
injured.
we are not talking about a 2022 game. No.
I
No,
will
we're not
not.
doing this.
Ty, that's my point. My point was that year they were overinflated until somebody came and finally smacked them, and then it went fully off the tracks, even when Dylan Gabriel got. But not to get back into that. But what I'm saying is until OU can get their injuries under control and their offense, creativity, and play calling under control, I just think there's a very set ceiling as far as what OU is. And obviously, I think their ceiling is going to get artificially pushed if they do beat Texas, even though it's a rivalry game and anything can happen, like I said.
Hmm.
I'm curious to see if Texas wins this game, what the script writers have in store for the rest of the season, and what OU season looks like if they go to 4-2, and then they still have LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama right on the schedule. Like these games that are admittedly way tougher than Texas's schedule. So Texas gets through OU and Georgia. None of these teams are sleeping. Like you can't sleep for any of these games, but I really think these next 2 weeks are like the most critical points in the season.
And I will say, like, if you look at that schedule, that back half of the schedule for OU, it does look a lot lighter than it did in preseason. Alabama just lost on the road to Vanderbilt. LSU hasn't looked particularly great. Carolina has been iffy.
Right.
Ole Miss has had their moments. Mizzou got the doors blown off them against A&M. So it's one of those where if you get past Texas, if OU somehow beats Texas, you really have two mulligans the rest of the way. I'm
not going to stand for your
pocket.
I don't think like Alabama is somebody that you're like, that's not just a win now that they lost to Vandy.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying let's count Alabama. I'm not saying
like Alabama's not what we thought they were.
No, I'm just saying it feels more attainable. Like if you asked me last week, I'd be like, yeah, we're not going to beat Alabama at home, but now I feel like we can possibly win that one. Look, I feel like there are a couple.
If OU loses this one and they sit at 4-2, I think they have at least two more losses. Just managing your expectations, Bobby. Like there are at least two more losses on the schedule. I think it's 8-4 is the max we're going to see. So we gotta shut down the OU playoff run that I've been hearing.
You tell Bobby two more losses. He's gonna do the little mental math and he's gonna go, okay, we lose. Who do we lose to? We lose to Texas, and then we lose to someone else, and then we lose to Maine, and then we make it into the playoff. The other loss,
and then Sooner Magic will propel us to a national championship at 8-4.
No, the fourth loss is
all we got to do is get in. Don't let the Sooners in, baby.
Yeah. No, I will say though to circle back. Unfortunately, we are never beating the ball not nowhere allegations with this last 5 minutes of podcasting. But to circle back, Chris, on your summary, right? That's the reason why we're here in the SEC is because now more than ever we get that OU sucks unless Texas beats them, and then OU is really great and Texas is just really, really great. Or if Texas loses, OU is actually like, no matter what way it goes for either team, it's a quality game to have played, even though it's the exact same game that would have occurred in the Big 12. And it always had that little aspect to it. But seeing that SEC magic, that SEC bias is very real. I don't know if you felt that on the Texas side. Obviously, y'all haven't played, I don't want to say the caliber of games, right? Because we only have Tennessee to hang our hat on now. But
they played the worst team in the SEC. They have one SEC game.
Well, Bobby's Texas, like Houston, actually, really good now that they beat a terrible TCU team. Let's knock that sneaky Tulane team.
We played at Auburn, who is. I think they
bottom half of the SEC.
Bottom half, fine. Yeah, that's fine. I think they're miles better Mississippi State. And then we, played Tennessee relatively tough. Like
we scheduled tough. Michigan in good faith that they were better than they're bad. They're certainly not top 10, but at least we scheduled that, and then you have Temple. I don't know where we sit with Temple.
Temple's not
one of the worst teams in the FBS.
Yeah, like if you look at a couple statistics, they're like ranked below, like I don't know, like Pittsburgh State, Shout out to the Gorillas. Anyways, let's wrap this thing up. Chris, we've been talking about this game, talk about where the Sooners and the Longhorns are. What is your final prediction for OU Texas?
All right. My prediction is 34-17 Texas. And here's where I'm going with that. I think it's going to feel like a slow-paced SEC game that just slowly gets out of hand, like slowly out of the grasp of OU. I don't think it's going to be like 34-0 and then garbage time. I think it's just going to be 7-0 Texas, 10-0 Texas, 10-3, like just slowly, incrementally adding scores. But ultimately, I know Ty is making faces, but ultimately, I think the real issue is just going to be OU's defense is going to be out there for too long. If Hawkins has a couple series that don't go well and Texas adds a couple scores and that suddenly changes the game plan, it's going to be hard for Hawkins to have to come back if they're down 10-0 or whatever the score might be. And I think it's just a slow-paced couple possessions here, punt a couple times, Texas scores, couple punts back and forth, Texas scores, and then you look up at the scoreboard and you're like, oh, it's out of hand. It's 34-17 and we're running the clock out or something. I'm certainly not saying it's a blowout or anything like that. I think OU's defense is really good. Texas is not putting up 50 points. I'm definitely sure of that. From what I've seen from OU and Texas, I'm just not really sure what OU's offensive game plan is going to be.
I think that's fair. I think that's a really fair point. And I think if we don't see change, if there's nothing that, changes from what we've seen so far to now, we're probably very toast. OU is probably very, very toast because what we've seen out of Seth Luttrell and that offense has been, like, as you said, uninspiring. And OU is going to have to bring a different offensive element to this. Or
I gave you an example off air, Bobby. I said it was going to be close to the Texas-Michigan game. That's really how I feel. It's going to have a couple good defenses playing, and then it's slowly going to add scores until you look up and you've pulled away. So,
yeah. And I think that's a respectable take. I think that's a realistic look at where OU and Texas are, and I'm not sure if I agree with you just yet, but we'll talk about that on the weekend spread, whenever that time comes.
Bobby,
but
I know this. I've seen this movie before where he acts humble when I come on for this preview, and then somehow Texas fumbles it, and then Bobby just goes crazy with the oil barons or whoever he's hanging out with.
Yeah, no, well, that's what I do. I mean, maybe I'm not trying to rock the boat, and I know who OU is. And
they're a playoff team, Paul.
I think they can make the playoff. I actually really do. I think they can. We'll see. But things need to change. Things need to change starting this week. Maybe I'm a little delusional. We'll find out. And
everyone needs Jameson to come in and heal them. That's what they all need. All to be fixed.
I'm gonna say this about Texas too. I don't think they're as good as they were last year. I think last year's Texas.
I think the offense.
My goodness, Bobby, you're just doubling down here.
We could.
No, I'm going to say it.
I know we wrapped it up. I would say their defense maybe the slightest, almost non-noticeable step back, except for the pass defense. But I think the offense, maybe you just haven't watched enough. It just gets spread out to so many different people. It's crazy to watch. And I think that will be the issue for OU.
Okay. We'll see.
Bobby said.
I hope Texas Twitter comes after Bobby. I don't know if there's a lot. It's not volunteer Twitter, but I hope somebody out there goes after him.
Bobby goes, you guys like that last? What were you going to say?
No, you go ahead, Ty. Sorry.
I was going to say, Bobby said, you guys like that last 57 minutes of cold takes? You know what? Here goes one more for y'all.
I had to throw one little
thank you for
grenade.
coming on this ride with me. Here goes one more.
This podcast is slowly losing good graces of like every single fan base that they go against. Sorry.
Well, ow. I'm not even saying Texas is bad. Last year's Texas team made the college football playoff, man. Like, that was a damn good team. I'm maybe just throwing a little spice out here. If that's the meanest thing I can say is your other team was better than this team by a little bit. Like, I'm not saying this Texas team's trash. I think we're just assuming that they're at a different level, and I haven't seen it yet. I sure as hell might see it on Saturday. I'm just saying, but I think I personally think last year's team was slightly better. We'll find out. Again, cold takes, but we'll see.
I don't
We'll
think
see how it
I don't
goes.
think we're going to be hated by every fan base. It's certainly looking like I don't know what in the world that is. That sound. I'm sorry if that can be heard, but
I didn't hear anything.
I completely broke my chain of thought. I will say on keys to the game, like you talked about, Bobby said some important things there, and that's change. And change is really what it's going to take for OU to win this game. Specifically, every fan who's coming needs to bring pocketfuls of quarters to throw at Texas on the sideline and hopefully distract. And I don't want to say injure, right? We're not going to say that. We'll bring our podcast counsel on this weekend to see the legality of throwing pieces of change at Texas's players. But if we can get in their heads, by just bouncing, bits of change, maybe we knock the microphone out of their helmets or something. That could be a key to the game for OU.
That's very much not legal and a little too Texas techy. But
I was about to say they're going to turn into new Texas Tech.
That's what we start losing games and just immediately, have a heel turn. All right, that's all we have for this podcast, I think, boys. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is always fun every year to talk about this ball game. We'll be back.
Thank you guys
tomorrow.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm very excited to watch. I mean, I always watch the weekend spread, but I will be especially tuned in.
Hey, Chris, we might have a special treat for you with a State of the Frogs podcast.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, I waited to the end to share this, but Chris, could you answer in just one word where you went to undergrad?
TCU.
Okay, yes. Yeah, so just so that's on the record on this deposition here, but
no further comments.
Blake has been calling for a State of the Frogs podcast as well, where he's going to talk about your favorite team. And
I watched that in person this last weekend, and it was maybe one of the worst products I've ever seen since I started following TCU. So that's where we're at with that.
That was a disaster. Yeah,
the helmets were great though.
The helmets were great.
I watched
I
Houston fans make fun of us in our own stadium, and I didn't even know Houston had fans. It's a commuter school. And I watched them just yell, "Yeah, we'll take that," every time they ran for 10, 20 yards over and over and over again the whole game.
That is the worst trash talk. Yeah, we'll take that.
Embarrassed.
Yeah, we'll take.
Yeah.
And
our helmets looked like a pinball machine. They looked like pinballs.
That's so bad. All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll be back, I believe, tomorrow to talk about the state of the state fair. So every year we talk about OU, like how to do OU Texas right, how to do the state fair Texas. Go into the strategies for getting your coupons. The spots to get get the best beer, the spots to get the best food items, and that'll be a good time. We'll have old Boat and Blake on for that one as well, actually, because he was boots on ground today, getting a little preview for us. So good to see him there. But yeah, and then weekend spread on Wednesday, making our picks. We'll probably have another OU show at some point, get Jameson's thoughts on the game. So yeah, tons of content coming down for you here with the Red River preview. This is just the kickoff for it, but that's all we have for today. All right. Ty, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. We will see y'all next time. Boomer sooner, everybody. Horns down.
Hook 'em.
Boomer.